I am kind of curious. How is your energy level? Are you like sugar rush, sugar dip? Who has a sugar rush? Okay, I see like 10 sugar rush. Sugar dip? Sugar daddy? Vadim, Vadim. Oh, and the rest is all on Prague beer, I suppose. All right. So I'm Daco. I work at Google on the Dart virtual machine team. The virtual machine is the thing that runs Dart natively on your mobile phone or on your desktop. And today, I'm going to take you through Dart and Flutter through a lens of biology. And I must say to you, I never studied biology. So if you studied biology, please correct me because I don't know what I'm talking about. Little disclaimer, this is my opinion, so this doesn't reflect anything from the larger Dart and Flutter team or Google. This is just my subjective opinion. All right, let's get started. So let me see if I can use this thing. Haha. So let's get back billions of years, all the way to 2011, when the first life was born. Um, and the first life, of course, I'm talking about Dart. In 2011, Dart was released, and it was this beautiful single cell. And in its DNA, it had optional typing, it had class-based inheritance, and it had something called loading from snapshot. And loading from snapshot was cool because when you have to JIT compile JavaScript, it's really slow on startup. But if you have a snapshot, it's very fast. You need a Dart virtual machine, though, in the browser in order to make it fast. And why was Dart released? Well, this was an era, like now you will know how old I am. This was before TypeScript. TypeScript didn't exist. And there was this thing called JavaScript. And JavaScript has no types. And if you have 5 million lines of JavaScript code, that hurts. It really, really hurts. So Dart was created to deal with this. It had optional typing, so you could add types, which was great for single-page web apps. And Google internally had a bunch of very large single-page web apps, Google AdWords, for example. So when Dart was released, it initially took off quite quickly because it was filling a niche, at least within Google, where it was really painful if you didn't have types and you had millions of lines of code. So Dart filled this niche. And this is like a little graph, and it's like a logarithmic scale or exponential, how you want to say it. So keep that in mind. So Dart was growing, and now Dart was this like single cell, and it grew in this primordial soup. And at some point, Dart thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to venture out into the large world. But the large world outside where it was born was very hostile. And this single cell didn't really survive outside the primordial soup where it was born. So for many, many years, Dart adoption stagnated. Dart didn't grow anywhere else besides single-page large web apps and besides Google and a handful of other places where it was used. And the rest of the world adopted TypeScript. So bye-bye Dart. And then in order to, make life even more painful, Chrome decided to not ship the Dart virtual machine in the Chrome browser, which meant that Dart also had to be compiled to JavaScript and was basically as slow as TypeScript. So yeah, that was Dart in 2015. Now, what we call this in biology, and correct me if you know more about biology than me, is a refugium. A refugium is it calls back flee. So you flee back to a place where you're safe and you can survive. So the primordial soup where Dart could survive was single-page large web apps, and that was it. And usually what happens to a species when it is in a refugium is it undergoes genetic drift. And Dart underwent genetic drift. Dart's DNA changed. It got method cascades in 2012. In 2015, it got enums and async await. And then in 2016, it got strong mode, which later would become a strict type system. However, in 2017, everything changed. And what you see here are two cells, and this is called in biology endosymbiosis. And endosymbiosis is the process where one cell engulfs another cell without eating it. So you have two cells, they live on each other, and they both serve a different role. And of course, I'm talking about Flutter. So in 2017, Flutter came around. And in this endosymbiosis, the host cell would be Flutter, and the endosymbiont is Dart. So endosymbiont usually provides the energy, and Dart has a very fast virtual machine. It has a stateful hot reload. It has all the cool features that are very powerful for Flutter, but Dart couldn't live in the very hostile world. But Flutter knows how to integrate with the hostile world. It knows how to package stuff on iOS and Android. It knows how to render pixels, and it knows how to deal with user input. So that's what Flutter is good for. And this synergy is very potent. So within a year, basically, Dart adoption grew by an order of magnitude. So it came out from its refugium inside Flutter, and it went everywhere in the world. And very quickly, Dart kept evolving as well. So we got our sound type system in 2018, and now almost immediately we go to like the next phase, because now you really see the package ecosystem take off. And one thing that I want to like say here is that this package ecosystem was not created by the Dart and Flutter team at Google. This was you guys. I don't know if there's anyone in the room who wrote Dart packages this long ago. Was anyone writing Dart in 2018? Okay, 2 hands, 3 hands. 2019? Oh, Vadim. 2020? Oh, yes. So 2021? Yeah, slowly more hands. Okay, cool. So, and of course, we could call this new phase the Cambrian explosion of life, but it's not the right description here, because I think syntropic consortium is a nicer word, because a syntropic consortium is a bunch of different cells where every cell produces some chemicals and eats some chemicals, and the one cell produces some chemicals that are consumed by the other, and they have like a synergy together. And here we can really see that already the Dart and Flutter ecosystem is becoming bigger than whatever Google or the people at Google could have ever made. And of course, more and more packages were released. These are some non-Google owned packages that were released at the time, and there are many, many more. I just picked some. So please, if you're the author of one that's not listed, don't be upset or come punch me later. And of course, it was not just people outside Google. At Google, we also continued evolving Dart and Flutter. So in 2019, we got extension methods and control flow collections. In 2021, Dart became null safe. Who had the pleasure of migrating their code to null safety? That was a lot of fun, wasn't it? And we lost the foreign function interface, which I worked on. I wasn't the inventor of it. That was my skip manager, but I wrote most of the code. So if you want to know anything about interoperability with other languages and Dart, come see me after the talk. And then we also had some Flutter stuff. So Flutter added add to app in 2019, and in 2021, Flutter for web, 2022, Flutter for desktop. And then around 2022, we see another shift, another phase in the biological evolution. So in 2018, how Dart and Flutter works was mostly dreamt up by the people in Google designing Flutter and Dart. And there were some like things intentionally left open. For example, Google didn't do state management, and then we had a bunch of state management libraries that were written by non-Googlers. But in 2022, stuff starts really changing, because in 2022, the community starts launching projects that really fundamentally change how the ecosystem works. So first that I'm talking about is Shorebird. Shorebird released Code Push, and that fundamentally changes how you can ship updates to your users. So you don't have to ship an update to the App Store. You can immediately ship via Shorebird the updates to the app. And then Serverpod launched, and Serverpod changed how you can write backend code. You can write backend code in Dart. You no longer have to write it in another language. And then Jasper came around. Jasper is a web framework that has a very similar look and similar feel of writing code to Flutter, but it renders immediately to HTML elements instead of to pixels, what Flutter does. So I'd say that from 2022 onwards, Flutter, the Flutter ecosystem and Dart ecosystem starts to be a superorganism. And one of the things that is a key component of a superorganism is that the intelligence is distributed. It's like multiple actors, and they all act, and then they interact, and there's no central intelligence anymore. And at the same time that these things happen outside Dart and Flutter, we also see that non-Google organizations start taking over pieces of Dart and Flutter. So in 2020, Canonical started contributing to Flutter Desktop. And if you saw the announcements last week at I/O, now Canonical basically maintains Desktop fully. So they own it. So with this biology lesson, I would say that also if you look at this graph, which is like an exponential graph, the community is much, much larger than the team at Google. Over this whole time, the team at Google has been roughly the same size, but the community has been exponentially growing. So the amount of work that's happening within Google on Dart and Flutter is percentage-wise becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And in the age where the community is better equipped to build some things, my opinion is that Google should not be building those things. So for example, in 2022, Jasper came around, and Jasper is just a much better way to create HTML than Flutter. I don't know if you've ever, who has ever tried in Microsoft Word to export a document as HTML? Yeah, so you have a single page and you get 30 kilobytes of HTML, right? The HTML renderer in Flutter was basically very, very similar. And just like Google Docs export to HTML didn't really work, the HTML renderer was never on par and it was always broken. So Flutter team decided to remove it. So if you want to render to HTML, use Jasper. Jasper is amazing. I don't think Killian is here because I saw him online the day before yesterday and he didn't seem to be traveling. But if you meet him, give him some kudos and use this framework. Jasper is amazing. So my observation is, or my opinion is, that we are a superorganism. And if we are a superorganism, then the next question is, what is the best way for us to function as a superorganism? And in order to function as a superorganism, we need to understand that our software structure and our communication patterns, they have a relationship. And you might be aware of Conway's law. Anyone seen this picture before? Oh, that's less than I expected. Oh, it's very low resolution, but I find it very funny. If you don't know it, look it up. Conway's law. I don't think it's XKCD, but it looks like XKCD. But you can Google it; you will find this. So Conway's law says that the structure of the software that you ship is a mirror of the communication structure in your organization. And here are some examples of what the communication structure in some organizations might or might not look like. In 2013, I think this illustration was released. So what you can do with Conway's organization is okay, if you don't like the way that your software is structured, maybe you should change the communication structure in your organization. Because if you change the communication structure in your organization, you will change the architecture of your software. But you can generalize this. So this is a term that I found in the literature, which is called socio-technical congruence. And this is, in general, how well the alignment is between your software and your communication patterns. And if the communication patterns match your architecture, life's good. But if your communication patterns don't match the architecture of your software, you're going to have a lot of friction, because maybe you need to interact with some code, and the author of that code is like a person you never talk to, right? And then it's very hard to interact. And I would argue that this concept is not just for you in your company, but this is across the whole technology stack, right? So if you are using Flutter framework and you're not communicating with the authors in the Flutter team of the Flutter framework, you might have a lot of friction for using the Flutter framework, because maybe you want something, but you're not asking for it, and maybe it's very easy to do. And you can actually kind of do the inverse Conway maneuver. So like with Conway, if you want to change the architecture, you can change the organization, but you can also do the other way around. You can do an inverse Conway maneuver where you say, okay, I'm going to change my software architecture so that it's better for communication patterns, or so that it incentivizes certain communication patterns. So if we are a superorganism and our software architecture and our communication patterns are related, and this applies to the whole Dart and Flutter ecosystem, which is all of us, or the ones of you who are not using Flutter yet, you will soon maybe, or not, who knows. I have some ideas about what we should do about architecture and communication patterns. So my first principle when I reflect on this is called avoid privileges. Problems should be solved on the right layer. What do I mean with this? I have an illustration here. So I started working on the Dart VM team. So that's like the middle box. So that's a Dart virtual machine. And the Dart virtual machine is part of Dart standalone. So if you run Dart space something on your computer, that's Dart standalone. And it's also part of Flutter. When you deploy Flutter onto a mobile phone or on the desktop, that's also running natively. So the Dart virtual machine is there. And at some point, we introduced Dart FFI. Now, Dart FFI sits in the virtual machine. Why does it sit in the virtual machine? Because a foreign function interface calls functions from one language in another language. And that needs to happen on a very low level, like on the CPU with registers. And if you were here this morning with the iOS talk, we were like in the debugger, moving, touching register values. A foreign function interface does that stuff all the time. So that needs to be like the lowest level. Like that's the Dart VM. The Dart VM runs your Dart code. It makes everything machine code. And then if you want to talk, for example, to C, C is also machine code, but different. So you need to like bridge that with a foreign function interface. Now that's all nice. It all worked very nice. But the Dart virtual machine cannot bundle native code. Now, Flutter can bundle native code. It can do it through plugins. So you can reuse Flutter plugins with CocoaPods or Gradle, Swift Package Manager, CMake, whatever stuff to bundle native code. And then you can use the foreign function interface to talk to that native code. However, if you then try to use that code in Dart standalone, stuff doesn't work because Dart standalone doesn't have a native build system, right? So then we had this convention where you would have like a bin/setup.dart script, which would, I don't know, build your native library. For example, I don't know, maybe you want to use SQLite, right, the database. So you would not need to download that in the script. And this is kind of weird, right? Because now we have Dart FFI in one layer, and we have plugins and setup script in another layer. And kind of coming back to the privileges, like Flutter actually had like kind of a solution that worked. Like if you ship a plugin and someone pulls it via the package manager, it works. But if you pull it in Dart standalone, your users need to run the bin script because otherwise stuff doesn't work. So like Flutter is privileged over Dart standalone, and that's a code smell. And also, because it's in 2 different layers, your Dart code ends up looking like this. Basically, you have a switch. You say, am I in Dart or in Flutter? And if I am in Flutter, am I in the Flutter test runner, or am I running like in a Flutter app? And if I'm running in a Flutter app, am I on iOS? And if I'm not on iOS, this is like totally a code smell. Like this is horrible, ugly. And this is because the Dart code that's on the inside doesn't know in what context it's being used. So this was a bad solution. I built this, so I'm responsible for this. This is a bad solution. This is stuff solved on the wrong layer. So instead, 3 years later, we built this. We built something called build hooks. So what build hooks are is you can write a hook in your package, and both the Dart and Flutter SDK know how to run that hook. And that hook gets like some information, for example, your target OS and your target architecture. And then the hook can build or download the dynamic libraries and report it back to Dart and Flutter. And then Dart and Flutter will just bundle it in the app bundle wherever it's needed. And you report this with an asset ID. And then when you do Dart FFI code, you use that asset ID and you say, like, I want to call the native function in this asset with this asset ID. And then that works. And the reason that that works is because we have an embedder API. So the Dart VM will call the embedder API. It will call out to the things surrounding it with, hey, please open the dynamic library with this asset ID. Then either Dart standalone or Flutter, and Flutter could be the test runner, or it could be the app, and it could be iOS or Android or desktop, doesn't matter. It will open the dynamic library and give back a function pointer or a library handle in which you can look up the functions. So that works much better. And I think I already talked about this. So basically what happens is when you do Flutter run, we invoke the build hook and we provide a build input with the target OS and target architecture, and then you get code assets, dynamic libraries. And then at runtime, the Dart VM says, oh, I want to open something with an asset ID, and it goes to the Flutter engine. The Flutter engine opens the dynamic library because the Flutter engine knows where the Flutter tool put the thing, and then goes back to the Dart VM, and it can call foreign code. This is just one example that I know very well because I shipped something and then it didn't really work and people started complaining, and then I shipped something else 3 years later. But there are many more examples. So for example, one of the other things that happened was initially when Flutter was released, there was like Flutter duplicated a lot of code of the pub package manager because you wanted package management stuff in the Flutter command. And that was all very painful. So that was solved on the wrong layer. Flutter shouldn't do any package management stuff. So what happens instead now is like the pub client is just embedded in Flutter. And if you do Flutter pub, it's exactly the same as if you do Dart pub. And it's just the code is shared, it's the same thing. But of course, this principle applies anywhere in our ecosystem. So for you, when you're writing an app, for example, if you're doing like the same pattern in widgets every time, maybe you shouldn't duplicate that. Maybe you can make a package so that it becomes reusable. Or maybe you're working around like a weird quirk in the Flutter framework. Well, instead of working around it, maybe you should make a bug report so that it can be fixed in Flutter. So problems need to be solved on the right layer. All right. Everyone still awake? How much sugar high? Sugar high? Can I see hands for sugar high? Oh, that's not many. Sugar crash? More hands for ooh. Okay, I'll be hype. Don't be the boss. Okay, I showed you this diagram. And the Dart VM does not expect to be the boss. It expects to be embedded in another piece of software. But Flutter also has an embedder API. So the way that Flutter works is it can be embedded in some other native code. And for example, this is how Toyota ships its infotainment system. It embeds a whole Flutter engine inside, which then embeds a Dart virtual machine inside. And another way that Flutter doesn't expect to be the boss is add to app. You can have an existing Android app or an existing iOS app, and you can add a Flutter screen to it. And this actually, this this is a cause of a lot of stuff and complexity in the Flutter tool. So you better be happy with this, because the amount of hours that I spent because we have add to app, come see me later and I can complain. Another way that you can avoid being the boss is to add API capabilities in your layer so that problems can be solved in another layer. And this is like already starting to touch kind of on the communication structure of our ecosystem. So if a problem can only be solved in your software, in your layer, then if someone wants to make a change, they need to send a pull request, right? And you need to argue about whether that's the right thing to do and to merge it and blah, blah, blah. If you make your layer have a bunch of callbacks and a bunch of options, right, then whoever wants to make your stuff more configurable, actually they already have the options, right? So if you make your layer more configurable, you need less communication with people on other layers. And one example of this was the Dart FFI that we introduced, which gave foreign function capabilities to packages. Because before we had Dart FFI, like before 2019, the only way to interoperate with native code was to build your own embedder, like Toyota did, or like Flutter is doing. Which, of course, made your code not reusable, because if you publish a Dart package, but you need to build your own Dart virtual machine locally, that, that's not really how it works, right? So here, Dart FFI is like, it's a technical solution, but it solves a communication problem, because maybe people wanted to do native interoperability. People wanted to use C code, but if you used it, you had to build your own Dart VM with your C code included. And with FFI, that's no longer the case. You can just ship it as a package, and someone else doesn't have to build Dart themselves locally in order to use the native code. Another project illustrating this principle is what Flutter currently doing. Flutter is doing something calling decoupling design, which is moving material and Cupertino outside of the Flutter framework into separate packages. And the reason that this project was started is because if it's coupled with Flutter, it means that everything needs to go through the Flutter repo. So if third-party contributors want to contribute, it's a lot of coordination. And also, the release cycle is tied to Flutter. While if it's a package, you can just release a new version of a package. And also, you can have two major versions existing at the same time. While if you ship it with Flutter, you can only have one major version. That's it, no breaking changes. Make no mistake, though, like a project like what Flutter is currently doing is extraordinarily hard. So if you have existing spaghetti code and existing monolith, and you want to untangle that, that requires a lot of design discussions and a lot of diagrams and a lot of thinking and deep, deep discussions. So being able to solve the layer, a problem on the right layer reduces coordination burden, and it improves our socio-technical congruence, to use expensive words. OK, the next one is a bit of a more philosophical one. And that's, I called it involve with the environment, is that what layer you should solve a problem on might change over time. So if I go back to this nice picture, we see that in the beginning, it's all not so much Dart. And in the end now, a lot of people are writing Dart. And what I alluded to earlier is that many more capabilities in our ecosystem are written by people outside of Google than inside of Google. And so instead of building new features and capabilities, I would argue that the Dart and Flutter team at Google should focus on building things that enable the community to build things. Because otherwise, the Dart and Flutter team at Google are the bottleneck. So some things are now better solved by the community than by the core Dart and Flutter team. And in my opinion, Jasper is a great example for that. Like Jasper solved the niche for a web framework written in Dart, and I recently migrated my own personal website that had been like some kind of Ruby script for 15 years that I didn't dare touching, and it was a dream to migrate it to Dart. And then if you're thinking this way, then the question kind of becomes, what should the Dart and Flutter team do to unblock the community to build the things that are needed? And if I reflect on this like changing over time thing, I don't think it was a mistake that Material and Cupertino were built into Flutter from the get-go, right? Because when Flutter was released, or when Flutter was built around 2017, there was no community using Flutter. And the whole tech stack was all in one room. Everyone was sitting in Silicon Valley. So there was no communication issues because the whole team was there, and it was both the rendering team and the widgets team and the material team and the Cupertino team, and everyone was in the same room, right? So there was like perfect communication, and so all the code being tied together allowed the team to move really fast. But that was 2017, and now we're in 2026, and we're in a very different situation. So where this problem is solved, the layer is changing. So now we're moving it out. And so that's a extension and pluggability task. Like the Flutter team is doing this. They're not adding any new features or capabilities for you. Zero, right? You're not going to get anything new. You're only going to like change your import from like, I don't know, material, Flutter something something to package something something. But then everything that comes after is better, right? The communication becomes better. The coordination becomes better. Another example where the right solution is changing is tree shaking. You might be aware that Flutter has an icon tree shaker. It tree shakes your icons. And this solution was built into Flutter years ago. And it was the right thing because it was quick and dirty, and it was internal, and it made your Flutter app about 10% smaller, which is great. But someone filed an issue. In theory, we could probably use this technology to shake any kind of assets. And that thing got a lot of upvotes, and nothing happened, but something should happen. So I recently started working on this, and I see that my time is running slow, so I'm going to speed up. Are you ready for less sugar and more speed? So one of the things when you want to do tree shaking is you need to know what to keep. And so there's always a mapping between your Dart code and whatever assets you have. And with the icon tree shaker, it's with this like icon data class. And the Dart compiler records all the const instances. So like you're going to have like a code point and a font family. And that if you have constants and you keep them, you know that you need to keep those icons. So that's all built into Flutter and Dart. But now we can add a record use annotation on top, which will, in general, tell the Dart compiler to record it. And then we want to use that recording somewhere. So I showed you the build hooks earlier. And now we're adding link hooks where this recorded use information from the Dart compiler is being passed in. And you can use this information to tree shake your own assets if you enable some experiment flags, that is. And of course, that information comes from the Dart compiler. So like Flutter run calls the Dart compiler. It gives you all the recorded uses. It goes to the link hook. And in the link hook, you can make your assets smaller. And if you actually want to make images or sounds or any normal Flutter assets smaller, you need another experiment flag, which will enable data assets to flow through this pipeline of build hooks and link hooks. And if you're interested in this, come see me later. Yeah, one other thing here that's kind of interesting is, okay, it's my opinion that the Dart and Flutter team should do less, and you as the community may pick up things that the Dart and Flutter team is not going to do, but then you actually need to know what the Dart and Flutter team is not going to do, right? So I think we at Google could grow in telling you what we're not doing so that you can volunteer to do it. And one thing where I think the community did a way better deal than that we could have ever done is this thing. Has anyone used this before? Hands? Okay, I see one hand. Two hands. So this is the Flutter Rust bridge. So the Dart FFI does interoperability with C code, but Rust is not C, but Rust can compile to the C calling convention, and then you can call Rust code. And this project is like super active and has like a lot of users, and it's super amazing. So this is great. And I try to do my best to be proactive, to communicate what we are not going to do. So I filed this issue. I want this package, and I clipped the text out because you're not going to be able to read it anyways. But basically, the issue said like, we want this package, but we're not going to write it because we don't have time. And then we slap a big contributions welcome label on it. But maybe actually this label should be renamed, and it should be like owners wanted with like Uncle Sam pointing. And I gave some examples for Dart and Flutter, but I also think that this is applicable to what you're doing. If you're, for example, the author of a package, this is the same thing, right? It doesn't need to be, you need to be the author of Dart or Flutter. If you're the author of a package or the author of an SDK, all of the same things apply, right? You're going to add some features, you're going to have some users, they're going to request some features, you're going to add more features. And at some point, you're going to have so many users requesting new features that you're like, you know what, I need to add a plugin API or an extensibility API so that every user can add their own features. This leads us to the next principle, which is we are not in the same office. Like we as in you all are not in the same office and I'm not in the same office as you, which means that communication is hard. So one thing that I would say if you own a package or if you own an SDK is be available for your users. Like tell your users that you don't bite and that they can reach out to you and that they should file issues and that they should come join your Discord or Slack or whatever channel. And it doesn't matter so much where or how. Like I really like GitHub. So please, if you want anything from me and the interop team, file issues on GitHub, but doesn't matter what you use. And the next one is the inverse, which is communicate to your providers. So everyone here uses packages and everyone uses SDKs. But the maintainers of those packages and SDKs, they have no idea what you need. And I'm always kind of surprised how hesitant people are to file issues or to reach out. Like, we don't bite. Please write bug reports. Please send emails. Please reach out. Because when you're a package author or an SDK author, you have no clue what your users want unless they tell you. And sometimes I am the user and the provider at the same time. And sometimes I don't realize. So I have this like little project. This all looks like tables, right? This is I have like a little project for doing my own finances, which is CSV in, CSV out. So it's basically like a functional programming thing to do my own finances. And it's all written in Dart and it's beautiful. And at some point I thought, you know what? When it's CSV in and CSV out, it's basically like functional programming. I can make like a nice caching platform, like make a package that caches function calls with input and output, so that only if I change one CSV, I only need to update all the CSVs that depend on it, but no other CSVs. So I wrote this package. It was glorious. Then 2 minutes later, I go and use my package, and I realize about half of the time that I update the CSV, I also update Dart code. And my package didn't deal with incremental updates of caches if my Dart code changes. So I'm basically using -- force all the time. So even if I'm the user and the provider, I'm not talking to myself. But it's much harder if you're not the same person. So please file issues. Yes, you're all users of the Dart language. The super parameters feature was not dreamt up by a Dart team member. This was a third-party person who filed an issue on Dart/language on GitHub. And this has been shipped in the language. So you can file, if you want a new language feature in Dart, file issues on the GitHub repo. Yes, I'm going to skip this. And I'm going to go to this one. So the last principle that I have is explore the full environment. In order to explore the full environment, you should explore what is the right solution and on which layer is the right solution. So this means you actually need to check out the source code of the frameworks that you're using, of the packages that you're using, and like go step through with it with the debugger and like change things and see what happens if something changes. Because nothing is as valuable in the ecosystem as someone who understands more than one layer. Because if you understand more than one layer, you can communicate with all the people that understand the other layers because you speak their language and it's much easier to reach a solution. And I promise you, this is the only AI thing that I have in the talk. When you are a coder on multiple layers, you're a real magician. Like, then you're a real magician. Magician level programmers are born when you start checking out someone else's source code and making edits and brainstorming. And of course, if you do check out someone else's code, you might actually get a working solution and make a pull request, which is amazing. And sometimes that pull request gets merged, but sometimes that pull request is only a proof of concept, and the maintainer of the package might say, yes, but that breaks some architectural thing, so we can't merge it. All right, let's try to land this plane, because I am out of time, and I don't know, beers are waiting for you maybe, and for me. So we started with a timeline of the Dart and Flutter project, where Dart took off, but then got stuck, and then with Flutter took off, and it's still taking off and still growing. And we are now in the phase of being a superorganism. And with Dart being a superorganism, it means that the role that the Dart and Flutter core team at Google are playing is getting smaller. And the role of the community is getting bigger because you're just more people, like orders of magnitude more people. Which also means that the role of the Dart and Flutter team is to make things more extensible. So I think in the coming future, you'll see less features from the Dart and Flutter team and more features from the community and more extensibility points and plugin points from the Dart and Flutter team. And I came up with some principles. Avoid privileges. Solve problems on the right layer. Don't be the boss. Don't assume you're the top layer or the bottom layer, but make it so that someone can use you somewhere in the middle. Evolve with the environment. If your package grows, maybe some problems that used to be solved in your package, maybe they need to be solved as extensions or plugins. Be available for your users. Communicate to your providers, very important. And explore the full environment to become a magician-level programmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Daco, for this marvelous journey regarding Dart and Flutter Cell until the superorganism. And we have the two questions for you. And I think you answered the first one. Why Google? No, sorry, the second one. With recent layoffs, is Google the support to Flutter weakening? You answered that, right? So it's the strategy of Google now to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say support is weakening. There's still a lot of Dart and Flutter code in Google, so I don't think Google can kill Dart and Flutter. They would kill like half of the revenue, which is a couple of billions. I mean, that's my humble opinion, not endorsed by my employer. Honestly, like we have a lot of AI pivots. I think they're even worse than the layoffs because every 3 months you're working on a different project. Also, my humble opinion.
But there is a new kid on the block, right? Kotlin MP. So how does it compare to Flutter and maybe the focus of activities at Google in that direction?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm working on the Dart virtual machine team and the interoperability, and I have no idea what Kotlin multi-platform does.
So let's finish on positive note that this superorganism is flourishing and going higher and higher, of course. And then why Google decided to use Dart for Flutter?
Oh, so I don't know the initial reasoning because I wasn't there when Flutter was started. Like I know Flutter was started because basically the creators wanted something like HTML and functional reactive programming for native. Why was Dart chosen? I think like JavaScript and other scripting languages are fundamentally not good for mobile. Because if you have a just-in-time compiler, it just drains your battery and startup is really slow, right? So you need an ahead-of-time compiled language, but you want the language that is as user-friendly as possible, right? So you don't want to write C if you're going to write a native app. It's just, I mean, maybe if you want to write a game engine for a native app, but not if you just want to write an app. You want a productive language with a garbage collector. So Dart has like the language features that allow it to be efficiently compiled to the web and to native, and it has hot reload. So it kind of has all the ingredients needed, and I think none of the other programming languages had that. Like back in the days, you have like the JVM, which would just pause all the time and make your frames drop, which is not great.